This is Delta Airlines, the most profitable airline in American history. $6 billion in profit last year alone. And this is Spirit Airlines, the most hated airline in America, the one with the smallest seats, the most outrageous fees, and the worst customer reviews on the internet. For over a decade, Spirit flew the exact same routes as Delta, the exact same airports, the exact same destinations, at half the price. Delta still won. How does the most expensive legacy carrier in America completely destroy the cheapest one? The answer is one of the most ruthless and calculated business traps in modern aviation history. A trap so perfectly executed that it led directly to this week's breaking news: the total collapse of Spirit Airlines. On May 2nd, 2026, at 2 in the morning, Spirit canceled every single flight. 60,000 passengers stranded. 17,000 jobs gone overnight. This is how it happened. Under CEO Ben Baldanza, Spirit Airlines invented something radical for American aviation: the bare fare. Strip everything out of the ticket price. Charge separately for bags. Charge for seat selection. Charge for carry-ons. Charge for printing your boarding pass at the airport. They removed the reclining mechanism from seats so they could physically cram one more row of passengers into the plane. 28 to 29-inch seat pitch, the smallest of any airline in America. The public hated it. They raged on social media. They screamed at gate agents. They swore they would never fly Spirit again. But Spirit didn't care, because they had cracked a mathematical cheat code. When a passenger searches for flights, the human brain focuses on one thing: the lowest number on the screen. Spirit knew this, and they built an entire business around it. Up to 50% of Spirit's total revenue didn't come from ticket prices at all. It came from ancillary fees, all the extra charges passengers paid after they had already clicked buy. Wall Street loved them. Spirit's operating margins hit above 20%. Morgan Stanley named them the top growth airline pick for investors in 2014. Spirit was growing fast, buying brand new Airbus jets, invading the most profitable domestic routes in America. They thought they had found a loophole that the big airlines could never close. Down in Atlanta, the executives at Delta Airlines were watching, and they were done playing nice. Delta had a problem. About 20% of passengers on their domestic flights didn't care about luxury. They cared strictly about price, and Spirit was stealing them by the thousands. Delta couldn't simply lower all their prices. They had expensive union pilots, free snacks, seatback screens, and billions in overhead. If Delta competed on Spirit's terms, Delta would lose. So Delta built a psychological weapon instead. In 2012, Delta introduced basic economy. This was the trap, and it was brilliant. Delta took the last rows of their aircraft and started selling those seats at exactly the same price as Spirit. On the surface, it looked like Delta was competing on price, but basic economy was never designed for passengers to actually buy it. It was designed as a decoy. When you searched for a flight, Delta suddenly appeared next to Spirit at $39. But the second you clicked the Delta ticket, a warning appeared. You cannot pick your seat. You board last. You cannot change your ticket. You get nothing. Delta had artificially replicated the miserable Spirit experience. But here is where the trap closed. Right below that warning, Delta offered an escape. For just $30 more, you could upgrade to main cabin, pick your seat, board normally, be treated like a human being. Over 60% of passengers who clicked the cheap Delta fare got so frightened by the basic economy restrictions that they voluntarily paid more to upgrade. Delta kept the customer, got them to pay more, and stripped Spirit of their only advantage in the search results. United copied it immediately. American copied it immediately. Suddenly, Spirit wasn't the cheapest option on the internet. They were just the worst one. And that wasn't all. United specifically targeted Spirit's Florida stronghold: Fort Lauderdale, Orlando, Miami, Tampa. Deploying bigger planes and more flights on the exact routes where Spirit was strongest. Spirit was being squeezed from every direction. legacy carriers matching their prices from above, and Spirit's own catastrophic reputation, destroying them from below. Studies showed that a significant percentage of Spirit passengers said they would never fly the airline again. Airline analyst Zach Griff summed it up perfectly. Spirit had stripped out so much from the experience that passengers who ended up on Spirit often despised it and were willing to pay $30, $40, $50 more just to avoid it next time. Spirit had built a business that attracted customers and then drove them away. By 2022, Spirit knew they were dying. Their price advantage was gone. Their reputation was beyond repair. Their costs were rising faster than revenues could handle. Then, JetBlue made an offer. $3.6 billion. $33 per share. A combined JetBlue and Spirit would have been the fifth largest airline in the United States, controlling 10% of the domestic market. For Spirit, it was the only realistic path forward. Then, the US government stepped in. The Department of Justice sued to block the merger. A federal judge agreed. The government argued that without Spirit, low-income Americans would lose access to cheap flights. They blocked the deal to protect the consumer, but they fundamentally misunderstood what they were doing. They didn't save Spirit. They handed them a death sentence. They forced a dying, unprofitable airline to stay independent in a market that had already moved past them. Spirit stock fell 47% in a single day. No buyer, no unique advantage, billions in debt, and no backup plan. Trapped with no exit, Spirit made the most fatal mistake of their entire history. They tried to outsmart Delta by becoming Delta. They removed their infamous change fees. They started selling bundled premium tickets that included checked bags, priority boarding, and Wi-Fi. They launched a product called Go Big, installing larger seats at the front of the cabin to attract business travelers. They genuinely believed they could steal loyal premium customers from Delta and United. It was suicide. Business travelers fly Delta because of the global network, the frequent flyer miles, and the exclusive airport lounges. Spirit had none of that. A corporate executive doesn't care if Spirit offers a slightly wider seat because the airport experience still feels like chaos. Spirit failed to steal Delta's premium customers, but they did something far worse. They alienated the only customers they had left. By adding premium perks, Spirit drastically increased their operating costs. To cover it, they raised their base fares. Suddenly, Spirit wasn't cheap anymore. They had stumbled into the deadliest position in aviation. Too expensive for budget travelers. Too uncomfortable for business travelers. They had deleted their own reason for existing. By quarter 2 of 2025, Spirit was posting a $246 million operating loss in a single quarter. They filed for bankruptcy in November 2024, emerged 6 months later, filed again in August 2025, and then the external world delivered the final blow. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel struck Iran. Oil routes through the Strait of Hormuz, through which 20% of the world's oil flows, were disrupted overnight. Jet fuel prices, which had been around $2.20 per gallon, started climbing. $1, then $2. By the end of April, $4.51 per gallon. Spirit's entire restructuring plan had been built around $2.24 per gallon. JP Morgan estimated Spirit was now losing 20 cents for every single dollar of revenue. The fuel spike alone added $360 million in operating costs, exactly equal to Spirit's entire remaining cash cushion. President Trump proposed a $500 million government bailout. The first time in American history, a president had proposed rescuing a single airline. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy called every major carrier. Nobody wanted Spirit. What would someone buy? Duffy asked. But here's the part of this story nobody is talking about. While Spirit was dying because fuel hit $4.51, Delta was completely fine. Not because they got lucky, Because in 2012, the exact same year Delta launched Basic Economy to trap Spirit in the search results, Delta quietly did something no airline had ever done before. They bought an oil refinery, the Monroe Energy Refinery in Pennsylvania, $150 million. Every analyst in the industry thought it was insane. Airlines don't buy refineries. But Delta's reasoning was simple. Fuel is our biggest single cost. If we control our own supply, we control our biggest vulnerability. When the Iran war sent jet fuel to $4.51 per gallon, Delta's refinery kept producing. Delta had also hedged the majority of its fuel requirements at far lower prices through long-term contracts. Spirit had assumed fuel would cost $2.24. Delta had spent a decade building a system to survive when it didn't. That is the real story of why Spirit died and Delta survived. Not better airplanes, not nicer service. Delta had built a fortress, financially, strategically, and operationally, that could withstand exactly the kind of shock that killed Spirit. And Spirit spent that same decade assuming the shock would never come. On May 2nd, 2026, at 2 in the morning, Spirit Airlines canceled every flight it had ever planned to fly again. 60,000 passengers woke up to find their flights gone. No compensation, no rebooking. A message telling them not to go to the airport. 17,000 people lost their jobs that morning. Spirit wasn't killed by bad airplanes or bad pilots. They were killed by their own arrogance. They thought they had found a loophole the giants could never close. They thought Delta would never fight back. They thought the government would let JetBlue save them. They thought fuel prices would stay low forever. Every single assumption was wrong. So the next time you search for flights and see a basic economy warning, remember this story. You are not just looking at a cheap fare. You are looking at the weapon Delta built in 2012. The weapon that executed the most hated airline in America. And more importantly, ask yourself this. If Delta was willing to spend a decade patiently destroying Spirit, which airline is next in their sights? Leave your answer in the comments and subscribe, because Spirit is not the last airline that is going to collapse this year.